The Millennium Falcon shuddered violently as it dropped out of hyperspace. Alarm klaxons screaming through the corridors. Han Solo's hands flew across the controls. His face twisted in concentration as he fought to stabilize the freighter. What the hell was that? He shouted over the cacophony. Chewbacca roared a response, his massive paws working the co-pilot station with frantic precision. I know we cleared the jump coordinates. Han snapped back. Something just appeared in the hyperlane. He froze, staring at the sensor readouts. That's impossible. In the cargo hold, C-3PO clutched a support beam as the ship bucked and rolled. Oh my. Oh dear. We're all going to die? I should have stayed on Tatooine. R2-D2 beeped sarcastically beside him, apparently unconcerned. The turbulence ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The Falcon drifted in the black void between star systems, its engines humming with an odd, discordant note that hadn't been there before. Han unbuckled and stood, drawing his blaster. Chewie, run a full diagnostic. Something came aboard during that jump. The Wookiee growled affirmatively and began scanning internal systems. Han moved cautiously toward the cargo hold. Every instinct he'd honed, through years of smuggling, screaming that something was very, very wrong. The door hissed open. Nothing looked disturbed. The cargo containers sat exactly where they'd been secured. The smuggling compartments beneath the deck plates remained sealed. But there was a sound. A small, high-pitched sound that didn't belong anywhere near his ship. I taw putty tat. Han spun toward the sound, blaster raised. Perched atop a cargo crate sat a yellow bird. Not a normal bird. This thing had a head proportionally too large for its body. Enormous blue eyes that radiated an unsettling innocence. And it was looking directly at him, with what could only be described as calculated cuteness. I did taw putty tat. What in the— Han began, but movement in his peripheral vision made him pivot. A black and white cat, also bizarrely proportioned, walking on its hind legs like a sentient being, crept along the deck, plating with exaggerated stealth. The cat's eyes were locked on the yellow bird with an intensity that transcended mere hunger. This was obsession. The cat placed one paw forward with theatrical slowness, then another, completely ignoring Han's presence. Its tail twitched with predatory anticipation. Okay, Han said slowly, blaster still raised but utterly confused about what he was actually supposed to shoot. I've smuggled spice past Imperial blockades, outrun Star Destroyers, and dealt with Jabba the Hutt. But this— the cat pounced. What happened next defied every law of physics Han understood. The cat launched itself through the air in a perfect arc, then somehow hung, suspended for a moment, legs still running, before plummeting straight down with a crash that should have shattered deck plates but instead produced a metallic boing sound. The cat's body compressed like an accordion, then sprang back to normal shape. It shook its head, stars and tweeting birds circling above it in a visible orbit. The yellow bird watched from its perch, utterly unmoved. Bad old putty tat. Han lowered his blaster slowly. I need to stop drinking Corellian whiskey. Chewbacca appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and unleashed a long, questioning roar. Your guess is as good as mine, pal, Han replied. But I think we just picked up passengers. The cat had recovered, impossibly, quickly, and was now eyeing a coil of cable, hanging from the ceiling. Its eyes lit up with renewed, scheming intelligence. It grabbed the cable, tested its weight, then began fashioning it into an elaborate snare with the kind of mechanical efficiency that suggested this wasn't its first improvised trap. I got a bad feeling about this, Han muttered. The cat positioned the snare directly below the yellow bird's perch, added a small mound of birdseed as bait. Where had it gotten birdseed on a smuggling ship? Then concealed itself behind a cargo container. Its tail tip twitched with barely contained excitement. The bird looked down at the obvious trap, tilted its head with exaggerated curiosity, then floated, actually floated, down from the crate without using its wings. It landed delicately beside the birdseed, completely avoiding the snare, and began pecking contentedly. The cat's face fell. Its ears drooped. Then rage twisted its features into something almost Sith-like, and it charged from concealment with a yowl that echoed through the cargo hold. The bird didn't even look up. At the last possible instant, it hopped 6 inches to the left. The cat couldn't stop its momentum. It hit the cargo containers at full speed with a sound like a gong being struck, its body impacting, with such force that it left a cat-shaped impression in the durasteel. The creature peeled off the wall slowly, fell flat on its face, and lay still for exactly 3 seconds before popping back up, apparently unharmed except for a slightly crossed expression. Han and Chewbacca exchanged glances. The Wookiee made a low, concerned rumble. Yeah, Han agreed. We're not telling anyone about this. Ever. See, 3PO's voice crackled over the comm. Captain Solo, I'm detecting highly unusual energy readings emanating from the cargo hold. The patterns don't match anything in my databanks, and I'm fluent in over 6 million forms of communication and physical phenomena. That's because it's not from this galaxy, a new voice said from behind them. Han spun, blaster up again. A woman stood in the corridor. No, not just a woman. Princess Leia Organa, her hair in those distinctive side buns. Her white senatorial robe somehow immaculate despite the Falcon's perpetual grime. But she wasn't alone. Luke Skywalker stood beside her, one hand resting on his lightsaber hilt, and old Ben Kenobi watched the scene in the cargo hold with an expression of fascinated bewilderment. How did you? We're not even at the rendezvous point yet. Han protested. We were tracking an anomaly in hyperspace, Luke explained, his young face earnest. Something tore through multiple dimensions. We followed the energy signature and found your ship. Obi-Wan Kenobi stepped forward, his aged eyes studying the bird and cat with an intensity that made Han nervous. The old man had a way of seeing through deceptions, of knowing things he shouldn't. Fascinating, he murmured. They don't exist within the Force. Not exactly. They're adjacent to it, operating under principles that supersede natural law. In basic, please, Han said. They're cartoon characters, Leia said flatly. Somehow, actual cartoon characters have manifested in our reality. The cat, having recovered once again, now produced from behind its back. Where had it been hiding this? A massive mallet easily 3 times its own size. It hefted the weapon, grinned with wicked satisfaction, and crept toward the bird with exaggerated tiptoe steps. Should we stop it? Luke asked uncertainly. I don't think we can, Obi-Wan replied. And I don't think we need to. The cat raised the mallet high, muscles tensing for the strike. The bird continued pecking at birdseed, apparently oblivious. The mallet descended in a devastating arc. The bird looked up, blinked once, and opened its beak. The mallet disappeared inside. The impossibly tiny bird had somehow swallowed the enormous weapon whole. It gave a small, satisfied chirp, and a mallet-shaped bulge traveled down its throat before vanishing entirely. The cat stared at its empty paws. Its jaw dropped. Its eyes bugged out to twice their normal size. Then, with a sound like a sad trombone, it collapsed into a miserable puddle of feline despair. Bad old putty tat, the bird repeated cheerfully. Leia pinched the bridge of her nose. The Empire has superweapons, Star Destroyers, and Darth Vader. The Rebel Alliance is outnumbered 1,000 to 1, outgunned at every turn, and fighting for the survival of freedom itself. And now we have this. This might actually help, Obi-Wan said thoughtfully. Everyone turned to stare at him. The old Jedi smiled faintly. The Empire operates on fear, overwhelming force, and absolute control. These creatures operate on principles that make no sense, follow no rules, and apparently cannot be destroyed. The Empire has no defense against chaos itself. Han holstered his blaster. Great. Wonderful. So we're weaponizing cartoon characters now. That's where we're at. The cat had recovered, again, and was now pulling from nowhere an elaborate contraption involving springs, nets, pulleys, and what appeared to be a small thermal detonator. It assembled the device with practiced efficiency, positioned it beneath the bird's perch, and activated it with a confident press of a button. The mechanism whirred to life. Springs coiling, nets spreading. The thermal detonator beginning its ominous countdown. The cat stepped back, arms crossed, grinning with absolute certainty of victory. The bird hopped off its perch, walked around the entire contraption, examining it from every angle with head tilted in apparent admiration, then flew up and perched on the cat's head. The cat's eyes crossed upward, looking at the bird, now using its skull as a roost. Its expression cycled through confusion, realization, horror, and resignation in rapid succession. The thermal detonator reached zero. The explosion was contained, barely, within the cargo hold's reinforced walls. But the concussive force rattled the entire ship. When the smoke cleared, the cat sat in the middle of a blast crater. Singed black, smoke rising from its ears. Its fur standing on end like it had been electrocuted. The bird remained perched on its head, completely unharmed, still chirping happily. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night, Han muttered sarcastically, though no one understood the reference. Leia stepped into the cargo hold, carefully avoiding the scorch marks. She knelt down until she was eye level with the bird. Can you understand me? I'm just a little birdie, Tweety replied with exaggerated innocence. Right. Leia straightened. And I'm just a simple senator. We're going to need to set some ground rules. The cat, having recovered its normal coloring through some impossible biological process, was now painting a tunnel entrance on the cargo hold wall. It stood back, admiring its handiwork, then sprinted full speed toward the painting. No, wait, Luke began. The cat hit the solid wall with a resounding crash and peeled off, leaving a cat-shaped impact crater. It wobbled dizzily, then noticed that the bird had somehow entered the painted tunnel and was waving goodbye from inside the two-dimensional artwork. The cat's eyes widened. It backed up for another running start. This is going to be a long mission, Han said to Chewbacca. The Wookiee groaned in agreement. Obi-Wan watched the chaos with the patient amusement of someone who had seen the Force work in mysterious ways for decades. The Force works in mysterious ways, he said, confirming Han's suspicion. Perhaps these creatures were sent to us for a reason. The Empire believes it controls the galaxy through fear and might. But you cannot intimidate chaos. You cannot destroy that which operates outside natural law. And you certainly cannot take seriously that which refuses to be taken seriously. The cat ran at the wall again. This time, instead of impacting, it actually entered the painted tunnel, disappearing into the two-dimensional space. For a moment, there was silence. Then both bird and cat emerged from the painting, except now they were in the corridor outside the cargo hold, having somehow traveled through solid bulkheads, via artwork that shouldn't have been anything more than paint on metal. Right? Han said, heading for the cockpit. I'm setting course for the nearest cantina. I'm going to get very drunk, and when I wake up, this will all make sense. Or I'll still be drunk. Either works. But as the Millennium Falcon's engines hummed to life, and the ship jumped back into hyperspace, a thought occurred to everyone present. If these cartoon creatures could violate the laws of physics itself, what could they do to something as rigid and absolute as the Galactic Empire? In the cargo hold, the cat was now constructing what appeared to be a rocket ship out of spare parts and sheer determination. The bird watched from a safe distance, head tilted, that innocent smile never wavering. The game of predator and prey had begun. The galaxy would never be the same. The Imperial Star Destroyer, Devastator, hung in the void like a dagger pointed at the heart of the rebellion. On the bridge, officers moved with mechanical precision, their fear of failure greater than their fear of death. They had reason to be afraid. Darth Vader stood at the viewport, his respirator breathing its rhythmic menace into the silence. Behind his mask, he meditated on the disturbance he'd felt in the Force, a wrongness, a chaotic ripple that didn't belong in the ordered universe the Empire was creating. Something had entered his galaxy, something that existed outside the natural flow of life and death. Lord Vader, Commander Pragi approached with carefully measured steps. We've intercepted a transmission from our spy network. The rebel ship that escaped Tatooine has been located in the Enote sector. The Millennium Falcon, as suspected. Prepare a tractor beam, Vader commanded. I want that ship captured intact. The princess will tell us the location of the hidden rebel base. What Vader didn't mention was the other thing he'd sensed, two presences aboard that ship that made absolutely no sense to his Force-attuned perceptions. They registered as life, but not as he understood it. They were flat somehow, two-dimensional in a three-dimensional universe. The predator and the prey, locked in an eternal dance that transcended purpose or meaning. It unsettled him in ways few things could. The Devastator entered hyperspace. its massive bulk tearing through dimensional barriers with imperial efficiency. They would reach the Falcon's position in less than an hour. Vader returned to his meditation chamber, but for the first time in years, he found no peace in the darkness. Aboard the Millennium Falcon, the situation had deteriorated magnificently. Sylvester had discovered the ship's ventilation system. More specifically, he discovered that Tweety liked to perch near the air vents for the pleasant breeze. What followed was an elaborate scheme involving vacuum tubes, redirected airflow, and a bag that the cat had somehow produced from nowhere that was specifically labeled bird catching bag. Han watched through a maintenance hatch as the cat worked, unable to look away from the sheer audacity of the physics violations he was witnessing. The cat had removed entire vent sections, rerouted them into impossible configurations, and set up a series of fans that shouldn't have fit in the spaces they now occupied. "This is my ship," Han muttered to himself. "I know every bolt, every panel, every system. That vent shaft doesn't connect to that one. It's physically impossible." Chewbacca rumbled a comment. "No, I'm not going crazy. The cat is going crazy. I'm just watching." The cat activated its contraption. The fans whirred to life, creating a suction tunnel that pulled with the force of a capital ship's tractor beam. Tweety, who had been innocently preening on a pipe, suddenly found himself caught in the airstream. "Oh," the bird cried as he tumbled through the ventilation system, spinning end over end through the tubes. The cat held the bird catching bag at the end of the shaft, grinning with malicious triumph. This was it. Victory was finally. Tweety shot out of the vent at supersonic speed, passed straight through the open bag without touching it, ricocheted off 3 walls with pinball precision, and landed perfectly on Chewbacca's head. The Wookiee roared in surprise. The cat stared at the empty bag. Its shoulders slumped. A single tear rolled down its face. Then the ventilation system, having been pushed beyond its design specifications, exploded. Not a catastrophic explosion, a cartoon explosion, with a perfectly spherical black cloud that hung in the air for exactly 2 seconds, before dissipating, leaving the cat standing in the center, charred black again, its whiskers bent at odd angles. "I told you we should have stayed on Alderaan," Leia said from the doorway. She paused, her expression flickering with pain at the mention of her destroyed homeworld, then hardened into royal composure. "Captain Solo, we need to discuss our passengers." "They're not passengers," Han protested. "They're stowaways. Weird, physics-defying, possibly hallucination stowaways. They're assets," Leia corrected. "Ben believes they could help us." In the ship's common area, Obi-Wan sat in meditation while Luke practiced with a training remote. The young Skywalker deflected energy bolts with increasing confidence, his connection to the Force growing stronger with each session. But Obi-Wan's attention was divided. Part of his consciousness extended toward the cargo hold where chaos and order waged their eternal war. "Master Kenobi," Luke said, deactivating his lightsaber. "What are those creatures exactly? You said they exist outside the Force, but everything is part of the Force. Even the Empire, even Vader, they're all connected to the living Force." "The Force connects all living things," Obi-Wan replied carefully. "But these beings, they're animated, certainly. They move, they think after a fashion, they even seem to feel. But they don't live in the way we understand life. They exist in a state of perpetual performance, playing out an archetypal drama, predator and prey, without conclusion or growth or change. That sounds like a horrible existence. Perhaps, or perhaps they've transcended the suffering that comes with mortality. They cannot truly be hurt, cannot truly die, cannot fail permanently or succeed permanently. They simply are." A tremendous crash echoed from the cargo hold, followed by the sound of springs bouncing, metal bending, and Tweety's cheerful voice. "Bad old putty tat. Though I suspect the cat might disagree with my assessment," Obi-Wan added dryly. R2. D2 rolled into the common area, beeping urgently. C-3PO translated with his typical anxiety. "Oh my. R2 says we're being followed. An Imperial Star Destroyer has entered sensor range and is closing fast." Han bolted from his position. "How close?" 20 minutes at current speed, Leia said, checking the tactical display. "We can't outrun them. Not with the hyperdrive still recalibrating from that dimensional breach." Vader's ship. It had to be. Han had known their escape from the Death Star had been too easy, had suspected the tracking beacon, but there'd been no time to search for it. The Empire had played them perfectly. "We need a plan," Luke said, reaching for his lightsaber, with the confidence of someone who'd never actually fought a Sith Lord. "I have a plan," Han replied. "We go into hyperspace the instant the drive is ready. Shoot our way out if we have to. And hope we don't cross paths with Vader." "Hope is not a strategy, Captain," Leia said coldly. "It's worked so far, Your Worship." In the cargo hold, Sylvester had recovered from his latest mishap and was now examining a piece of equipment he'd found in the smuggling compartments. Equipment that, had Han known the cat could access those hidden spaces, would have caused him significant alarm. The device was an Imperial comlink, one Han had acquired during a previous smuggling run. The cat, displaying intelligence far beyond what any normal feline should possess, activated the comlink. It had an idea. A terrible, brilliant, catastrophically stupid idea. Tweety watched from his perch, head tilted. What's the putty tat doing? What the putty tat was doing was hailing the Imperial Star Destroyer. On the bridge of the Devastator, a communication officer nearly fell from his chair. "Lord Vader, we're receiving a transmission from the rebel ship. Audio only. They're requesting to surrender." Vader turned slowly. This was unexpected. Princess Organa was many things: brave, stubborn, foolish in her idealism. But she was not a coward who would surrender without exhausting every option. "Put it through." What came through the speakers was not the princess's voice. It was not any voice Vader recognized. It was a sound that existed somewhere between a yowl, a meow, and what could only be described as smug feline satisfaction. The cat was speaking directly to Darth Vader. In the Falcon's cargo hold, Sylvester held the comlink and delivered his message, a complex series of meows, hisses, and gestures that somehow conveyed a complete proposal. He would deliver the yellow bird to the Empire. He would betray his allies in exchange for Imperial credits, a lifetime supply of cat food, and most importantly, help capturing his feathered nemesis. The transmission ended. Vader stood in silence, his respirator the only sound on the bridge. "Shall I respond, Lord Vader?" the communications officer asked nervously. Vader reached out with the Force, trying to touch the mind of the creature that had just made contact. What he encountered was emptiness, not the void of death or the absence of Force sensitivity. This was different. It was as if he'd reached into a space that existed in only 2 dimensions, a mind that operated on principles his Sith training couldn't comprehend. "Maintain pursuit," Vader ordered, "and monitor all frequencies." That was not Princess Organa. "No, my lord. Linguistic analysis suggests it was a cat." Vader said nothing. He had seen much in his years as a Sith, had witnessed the fall of the Jedi, the rise of the Empire, the transformation of Anakin Skywalker into something darker. But this was new territory. In the Force, he felt the disturbance grow stronger. The chaotic presence, the flat thing that shouldn't exist, was now actively interfering with Imperial operations. This could not stand. "Increase speed," Vader commanded. "I want that ship captured within 10 minutes." Han discovered what Sylvester had done when Leia burst into the cockpit, her face pale. "The Empire is responding to a transmission we didn't send. They're demanding we maintain our current course and prepare to be boarded." "What transmission?" "I didn't send any." Han stopped. Through the open doorway to the corridor, he could see into the cargo hold. The cat sat there, holding the Imperial comlink, grinning at the bird with an expression. "That flea bag is working with the Empire," Han said flatly. Chewbacca roared in outrage. "No, that's exactly what it did. It just sold us out to Darth Vader." Tweety, for his part, seemed utterly unconcerned. He hopped down from his perch and waddled toward the cat with innocent curiosity. "Does the putty tat have a plan?" The cat nodded vigorously, then pulled from behind its back a set of detailed schematics of the Star Destroyer. Where it had gotten Imperial ship designs was a mystery, but there they were, complete with annotations in Poritan Basic marking the location of the detention level, the tractor beam controls, and most importantly, the ship's galley. The cat pointed at Tweety, then at the detention level. Its meaning was clear. It would deliver the bird to Imperial custody, collect its reward, then feast in the galley while Vader was distracted. "That's actually not the worst plan I've heard," Han admitted. "Except for the part where we're all captured by the Empire. We could use it," Obi-Wan said, entering the cockpit with Luke. The Old Jedi had been, listening to the entire exchange with that maddening serenity he possessed. Allow the Empire to capture us. The tractor beam will pull us in. Once aboard the Star Destroyer, we rescue the princess from. He paused. Well, we're already traveling with the princess. But we rescue ourselves, disable the tractor beam, and escape. That's a terrible plan, Han said. That's a plan that depends on everything going right when nothing ever goes right. It's worked before, Obi-Wan replied with a slight smile. Leia studied the cat's schematics, her strategic mind working. If we're going to do this, we need to make it convincing. The cat's already made contact. We should let it continue. In the cargo hold, Sylvester was now preparing for his role as Imperial collaborator. He'd fashioned a small Imperial officer's uniform from fabric he'd found somewhere, complete with rank insignia and a tiny cap. He stood at attention, saluting nothing, practicing his most official-looking march. Tweety watched this performance with his perpetual innocent smile. Silly putty-tat. The cat whirled, pointing accusingly at the bird, then at the transmission device, then making elaborate gestures that clearly meant you're going in an Imperial cage and I'm going to finally have peace. The bird hopped closer. The cat backed away, suddenly nervous. There was something in that innocent stare, some primal force that transcended cartoon logic and touched on fundamental truths about predator and prey. The cat was the predator, yes, but it had never, in all its countless attempts, actually caught the bird. What would happen if it did? The thought made Sylvester pause. The uniform suddenly felt uncomfortable. The plan suddenly felt wrong. But no, this was victory. This was the culmination of every scheme, every trap, every elaborate device. The Empire would cage the bird, and Sylvester would finally. The Devastator's tractor beam locked onto the Millennium Falcon. Warning lights flooded the Falcon's cockpit. Han fought the controls, but it was useless. The beam's pull was absolute, inexorable, dragging them toward the Star Destroyer's massive hangar bay. Well, Han said, shutting down the engines. I guess we're doing this. Chewie, get the thermal charges ready. Your worship, stay close. Luke, try not to do anything heroic and stupid. And somebody keep an eye on those too. He gestured toward the cargo hold. Because I have a feeling this is about to get much worse. As the Falcon was drawn into the Star Destroyer's maw, Vader stood in the hangar bay, waiting. Stormtroopers assembled in precise formations. Officers checked their datapads. The Empire's machinery of control operated with flawless efficiency. And in the cargo hold of the Millennium Falcon, Sylvester the cat adjusted his tiny Imperial uniform one last time, picked up the bird-catching bag, and prepared to betray everyone he'd traveled with for the past few hours. Tweety flew to the cat's shoulder and perched there gently. Good luck, putty-tat, he said with genuine warmth. The cat paused, looked at the bird, felt something uncomfortably close to guilt. Then the Falcon's boarding ramp lowered, and there was no more time for doubt. The game was in motion. Darth Vader awaited. And somewhere in the cosmic dance between predator and prey, the fate of the rebellion was about to be decided by cartoon logic and Imperial arrogance colliding at fatal speed. The Millennium Falcon's boarding ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss into the pristine sterility of the Star Destroyer's hangar bay. Stormtroopers stood in perfect formation, their white armor gleaming under harsh artificial light. Officers clutched datapads, weapons were primed, and at the center of it all stood Darth Vader, a monument to darkness and absolute power. Han Solo walked down the ramp first, hands raised, Chewbacca beside him. Leia followed with regal composure, playing the captured princess role with practiced ease. Luke came next, his nervousness barely concealed. Obi-Wan moved like a ghost, already halfway to invisible despite standing in plain sight. And behind them, carried in a small cage that Sylvester had somehow constructed. In the past 5 minutes, was Tweety Bird. The cat walked down the ramp wearing his makeshift Imperial officer uniform, carrying the cage with both paws, his posture radiating officious importance. He'd even fashioned a small name tag. Officer Sylvester, Avian Containment Specialist. The stormtroopers stared. Several exchanged glances behind their helmets. One trooper leaned toward his companion and whispered, "Is that a cat?" "Shut up, TK-421. Vader's respirator echoed through the hangar as he stepped forward. His presence was suffocating. a weight in the force that crushed hope and bred despair. He studied the prisoners with mechanical precision, his mask revealing nothing. Then his gaze, or whatever served as gaze behind that black viewport, fell upon the cat. Vader tilted his head slightly. "What is this?" Sylvester snapped to attention, saluted with the wrong paw, corrected himself, saluted again, then held up the cage containing Tweety. The bird chirped happily from behind the bars. "The creature attempted to contact us," Commander Prodigy explained nervously. "It claimed to have information about a biological weapon. The transmission was unclear, my lord, but it seemed to be offering a prisoner exchange." Vader reached out with the Force, attempting to probe the cat's mind. What he encountered was a psychic landscape that made no sense. A flat dimension of endless chases, improbable devices, and a single-minded obsession with catching the bird. There was no malice in the traditional sense. No darkness the Sith could twist or exploit. Just pure, undiluted cartoon logic. "Fascinating," Vader said, and there was genuine curiosity in his mechanical voice. "You are not of this galaxy." Sylvester nodded vigorously, then began an elaborate pantomime. He pointed at himself, loyal Imperial collaborator. Pointed at Tweety, dangerous rebel weapon. Made explosion gestures, catastrophic threat to the Empire. And finished by rubbing his paws together and pointing at the ship's general direction of the galley. Payment in fish required. Several stormtroopers had removed their helmets to watch this performance. One was taking notes. Vader raised one gloved hand. "You offer the bird in exchange for food?" The cat nodded so hard his uniform hat fell off. "My lord," an officer interrupted. "Shouldn't we be interrogating the princess?" "The rebel base location." Vader silenced him with a gesture. Something about these cartoon creatures demanded investigation. They existed outside the Force, operated on principles that defied natural law, and most importantly, they had appeared precisely when the rebellion was gaining dangerous momentum. Coincidence? The Force did not believe in coincidence. "Take the prisoners to detention block AA-23, Vader ordered. "The bird remains with me." Han started to protest, but Leia grabbed his arm. This was the plan: get aboard, split up, disable the tractor beam. But as stormtroopers led them away, Han caught Obi-Wan's eye. The old Jedi gave the slightest nod. He understood. Whatever was about to happen with the cat and bird, it would serve their purposes. Sylvester watched the prisoners leave, then turned back to Vader with expectant excitement. The cage was offered. Victory at last. Vader took the cage in one massive hand, holding it up to examine Tweety more closely. The bird looked back with those enormous innocent eyes. Head tilted, completely unafraid of the Dark Lord of the Sith. "I'm just a whittle birdie," Tweety said sweetly. "Indeed," Vader replied. He could sense nothing from the creature. No fear. No connection to the living force. No biological imperatives beyond whatever existential purpose drove its existence. "And yet you represent something unprecedented." He turned to the cat. "You will accompany me. If this bird is truly a weapon, I will determine its function." Sylvester grinned and followed Vader out of the hangar bay, his tiny boots clicking on the deck plates. Around them, stormtroopers and officers tried to maintain Imperial discipline while processing the fact that Darth Vader was walking through the corridors with a cat in an officer's uniform. In detention block AA-23, things were proceeding according to plan, which meant chaos. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Han muttered as Luke worked to hotwire the cell door controls. "We're rescuing ourselves. From ourselves. This is the stupidest plan in the history of rebellion." "It'll work," Leia said with more confidence than she felt. "Ben is disabling the tractor beam. Once that's done, we fight our way back to the Falcon and jump to lightspeed before they can stop us." And the cartoon cat, who's currently collaborating with Darth Vader, is keeping Vader distracted by giving him a bird. Yes, a bird that can't be killed, follows no physical laws, and apparently swallows objects whole despite being 3 inches tall. "Your point, Captain?" Han opened his mouth, closed it, then shrugged. "You know what? I've made worse bets. Let's go." The cell door sparked and slid open. Chewbacca roared approval. They moved into the corridor just as Luke's comlink chirped. Obi-Wan's voice came through. "Calm despite the circumstances. The tractor beam is deactivated. I'm heading back to the ship. May the Force be with." Static cut him off. Then a different sound, the distinctive snap hiss of lightsabers igniting. Luke's face went pale. Ben, in Vader's personal meditation chamber, the Dark Lord sat in his pressurized throne while Sylvester and Tweety's cage rested. On a nearby table, Imperial scientists had been summoned, their equipment scanning the bird from every conceivable angle. "My lord," the lead scientist reported, his voice trembling. "The creature defies all known biological classification. Its cellular structure appears to be two-dimensional. That shouldn't be possible. And yet our scans show no depth to its matter. It's as if it exists as a drawing that somehow achieved animation." "Continue analysis," Vader commanded. The scientist nodded and returned to his instruments. Vader, meanwhile, studied Sylvester. The cat sat on a chair. When had it gotten a chair? Reading what appeared to be an Imperial manual on weapon specifications. Where it had obtained the manual was unclear. The creature seemed to manifest objects from nowhere, as if reality itself bent to accommodate whatever prop the narrative required. "Why do you pursue the bird?" Vader asked. Sylvester looked up, surprised to be addressed directly. He set down the manual and began another elaborate pantomime. He pointed at Tweety, made eating gestures, rubbed his stomach with satisfaction, then made a gesture that clearly meant, "Finally. After all this time, finally. You wish to consume it." The cat nodded. "And you have never succeeded." The cat's shoulders slumped. He shook his head sadly. "Yet you continue trying." Vigorous nodding. Vader leaned forward slightly. "This pursuit defines your existence. Without the chase, without the failure, you would have no purpose." The cat paused, considered this, then shrugged as if to say, "Yeah, so what?" "Curious," Vader mused. "You are trapped in an eternal cycle, playing out the same drama endlessly. Hunter and hunted, neither able to escape their roles. It is not unlike the Force, light and dark, locked in perpetual conflict." In the cage, Tweety had been quietly observing. Now he spoke, his voice carrying unexpected weight. "The putty-tet never catches me, and I never stop being chased. That's just how it is. An existence without growth or change," Vader said. "Many would consider that a prison." "Or freedom," Tweety replied. "No worries about tomorrow. No regrets about yesterday. Just a game." Vader stood abruptly. This philosophical discussion with cartoon characters was unsettling him in ways he hadn't anticipated. These creatures represented something his Sith training couldn't categorize, an existence beyond suffering, beyond the dark side's promises of power through pain. The scientist called out urgently, "My lord, the bird is exhibiting anomalous behavior." On the scanner displays, Tweety's two-dimensional form was somehow generating readings that didn't correspond to three-dimensional space. Energy signatures appeared and vanished without source or destination. The laws of thermodynamics were suggestions at best. And then, with perfect comic timing, Tweety simply opened the cage door from the inside, despite the door having no internal mechanism, and flew out. "Containment breach," a scientist shouted. Sylvester leaped from his chair with predatory glee. This was what he'd been waiting for. The bird was loose in Vader's meditation chamber, and now, finally, with the resources of the entire galactic empire behind him, Tweety flew directly toward Vader and perched on the Dark Lord's helmet. The chamber fell silent. Every scientist froze. Sylvester's jaw dropped. Even the ambient hum of the Star Destroyer's systems seemed to pause. Darth Vader, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet, Dark Lord of the Sith, stood perfectly still with a small yellow bird sitting on his head. I taught a putty-tat," Tweety said cheerfully. Vader reached up slowly. His massive gloved hand closed around the bird with force-enhanced speed that should have been impossible to evade. And yet, when he brought his hand down to examine his catch, it was empty. Tweety was now perched on his shoulder, looking at the empty hand with apparent fascination. "Interesting," Vader said, and the respirator made the words sound like a threat. Sylvester, seeing his prey within reach, made his move. He launched himself from the chair with a yowl, claws extended, every muscle committed to finally catching that smug little. Vader caught the cat mid-leap with the force, holding it suspended in the air. Sylvester's legs continued running in place, going nowhere. "You will cease," Vader commanded. The cat kept running. Its determination transcended the dark side's power. It existed in a state beyond force persuasion, beyond intimidation, beyond the physical constraints Vader could impose. Vader released his force grip. The cat fell, hit the floor, bounced once, and resumed the chase immediately. Tweety flew around the meditation chamber with the cat in hot pursuit, knocking over expensive Imperial equipment, scattering datapads, and transforming the Dark Lord's personal sanctum into a three-ring circus. "Stop them," Vader ordered. The scientists tried. Stormtroopers were summoned and tried. Even Vader himself tried, utilizing force pushes, equipment as barriers, and direct commands that had once brought Jedi Masters to their knees. Nothing worked. The chase continued, reality bending around it, physics taking a holiday. At one point, Sylvester produced an entire fishing rod from nowhere and cast it, like he was angling for the bird. At another point, Tweety somehow painted a fake window on the wall, and when Sylvester dove through it, he actually flew out into the vacuum of space for exactly 3 seconds before walking back in through the door, inexplicably unharmed. Vader watched this impossibility unfold with growing fascination and frustration. These creatures could not be controlled, could not be destroyed, could not be reasoned with or intimidated. They simply existed, playing out their eternal game regardless of who tried to interfere. It was, he realized, the perfect weapon against the Empire's philosophy. The Empire ruled through fear and absolute control. But you couldn't control chaos. You couldn't intimidate creatures that couldn't die. You couldn't impose order on beings that existed in deliberate defiance of order's very concept. "Enough," Vader said, and this time there was something different in his voice. Not anger. Respect? Possibly. He activated his comlink. "Commander, the prisoners in detention block AA-23. Have they attempted escape?" "Yes, Lord Vader. They've disabled the guard station and are currently fighting their way toward the hangar bay. We have them contained in." "Let them go." Silence on the comlink. My lord, you heard me. Let them escape. I want a tracking beacon on their ship confirmed. And then I want all forces to stand down." "But the princess, the rebel base, is precisely where we need it to be. The tracking beacon will lead us to it. Everything is proceeding as planned." Vader terminated the connection. Before him, Tweety and Sylvester continued their chase, now involving what appeared to be a portable hole that the cat kept trying to trap the bird in, only for the bird to somehow flip the hole and trap the cat instead. "You represent disorder," Vader said to them, though they weren't listening. "Chaos incarnate. The Empire cannot tolerate chaos. And yet," he paused, "you have revealed something valuable. You have shown that there are forces in this universe that cannot be dominated through strength alone." Tweety finally stopped flying, landing on the meditation throne with casual disrespect for Imperial authority. "Does this scary man in the mask want to play?" Vader considered the bird, considered the cat, who was now using complex trigonometry drawn on a chalkboard. Where had it gotten a chalkboard? To calculate the bird's trajectory. Considered the fact that these creatures had turned his meditation chamber into a disaster zone, and yet he felt no anger, only a strange, sort of bemused acceptance. "Go," Vader said finally. "Return to your rebel allies. You will serve my purposes better there." Sylvester looked up from his calculations, confused. Was Vader releasing them? "The rebels are escaping. Join them. Or don't. Your existence is immaterial to the Empire's victory." But even as Vader said it, he knew it was a lie. These creatures were anything but immaterial. They represented something the Empire had forgotten in its pursuit of absolute order, the unpredictable, the absurd, the chaotic element that made life worth living even as it made control impossible. The Force had brought them here for a reason. Vader was certain of that now. What that reason was, he couldn't say, but he suspected. He would find out when the rebel base was located and the Emperor's plan reached its fruition. Tweety flew toward the door. Sylvester, after a moment's hesitation, followed. The cat looked back once at Vader, saluted with the wrong paw again, and scurried after his eternal prey. The door hissed shut behind them. Vader stood alone in his destroyed meditation chamber, surrounded by overturned equipment and scorch marks from impossible cartoon physics. "Most impressive," he said to the empty room. Then he turned and walked toward the bridge. The rebels would escape. The tracking beacon would lead them to Yavin 4, and the Death Star would destroy the rebellion in one decisive strike. Unless, of course, cartoon logic decided to interfere with that plan too. Vader found he was almost curious to see what would happen. The Millennium Falcon's engine screamed as Han pushed them past safety limits. The Star Destroyer shrinking in the viewport behind them. Laser fire tracked their escape. But it was half-hearted. Imperial gunners aiming to miss rather than hit. Han knew the game. They'd been allowed to escape. There was a tracker somewhere on his ship, and Vader was letting them lead the Empire straight to the Rebel base. "We're clear," Luke shouted from the gun turret, relief flooding his voice. "We're not clear," Han muttered. "We're bait." In the common area, Leia was already planning. Obi-Wan sat nearby, his face drawn with exhaustion from his confrontation with Vader. The old Jedi had barely escaped with his life, and everyone knew the next meeting would be his last. The Force had shown him that much. Chewbacca roared a question from the engineering station. "Yeah, I'm running a sweep for tracking devices," Han called back. "Not that it'll do any good. They built these Star Destroyers. They know how to hide a beacon better than I know how to find it." A commotion from the cargo hold interrupted the tactical discussion. Specifically, the sound of something crashing. A cat yowling and Tweety's cheerful voice. "We're home." Everyone turned as Sylvester and Tweety emerged from the ventilation system, the same system they'd disappeared into when fleeing. Vader's meditation chamber. The cat was singed again, his Imperial uniform in tatters. Tweety rode on his head like a conquering hero. "How did you?" Luke started, then stopped. "You know what? Never mind. At this point, I'm just accepting it." Sylvester hopped down to the deck and immediately began examining the Falcon's interior with renewed interest. His betrayal had failed spectacularly, and now he was back to square one, trapped on a rebel ship, surrounded by aliens and humans who could squash him, with a bird that refused to be caught dancing just out of reach. The cat's expression cycled through shame, determination, and finally settled on resigned acceptance. He pulled out a small white flag from behind his back and waved it at Tweety. "Oh, Putty Tat wants a tuss?" Tweety asked innocently. Sylvester nodded. He made elaborate gestures indicating that perhaps, just maybe, they could coexist peacefully for the duration of this space adventure. After all, they were apparently both caught up in some galaxy-spanning war between good and evil, and continuing their chase might endanger everyone aboard. It was a surprisingly mature realization for a cartoon cat. Tweety considered this, tilted his head, then flew down and extended one tiny wing. Sylvester reached out with one paw. They shook on it. For exactly 3 seconds, peace reigned. Then Sylvester's other paw whipped out with a net. Tweety ducked, the net caught Chewbacca instead, and the Wookiee's roar of outrage shook the... "That's it," Han snapped. "Both of you cargo hold now? And if I hear one more crash, one more explosion, one more impossible physics violation, I'm spacing both of you." Tweety and Sylvester looked at each other, then at Han, then scurried toward the cargo hold with the practiced coordination of troublemakers who knew when they'd pushed too far. Leia rubbed her temples. "We're about to lead the Empire to the Rebel base. Our only hope is a desperate attack on a battle station the size of a small moon. And we're doing it with a cat and a bird who can't stop trying to kill each other." "When you say it like that, it sounds bad," Luke offered. "It is bad, Luke. It's catastrophically bad." Obi-Wan smiled faintly. "The Force works in mysterious ways. Perhaps our cartoon companions will prove more useful than they appear. Or they'll doom us all," Han said. 50-50 odds at this point. The Falcon jumped to hyperspace, the stars stretching into infinity. Behind them, aboard the Devastator, Vader stood at the viewport and watched them go. The tracking beacon was active. The Death Star was en route to Yavin. Everything was proceeding exactly as the Emperor had foreseen, except for one variable. 2 variables, technically. Vader found himself hoping the cat caught the bird, just once before the end. It seemed important somehow, in ways the Force couldn't explain. The Rebel base on Yavin 4 was organized chaos, pilots running to their X-wings and Y-wings, technicians making final system checks, and General Dodonna explaining the Death Star's one weakness with the calm of a man who knew the odds and chose to fight anyway. "The target area is only 2 meters wide," Dodonna said, his tactical display showing the Death Star's thermal exhaust port. "You'll have to use proton torpedoes. A precise hit will start a chain reaction that should destroy the station." "Should," Han repeated from the back of the briefing room. He decided to attend despite his insistence that he was leaving as soon as his reward was loaded. That's reassuring. The Empire doesn't consider a small one-man fighter to be any threat. Dodonna continued, ignoring the interruption. But our analysis shows that a direct hit-on that port will penetrate the reactor core and a tremendous crash echoed through the hangar bay. Every head turned. Sylvester had somehow accessed a rebel Y-wing bomber and was attempting to modify it into an elaborate bird-catching device. The cat worked with manic energy, welding panels, rerouting wiring, and installing what appeared to be a giant net launcher where the ion cannons used to be. Tweety watched from atop a stack of supply crates, head tilted with interest. "Get that cat away from the bomber," a technician shouted. "Don't bother," Leia said wearily. She'd been dealing with Tweety and Sylvester for the entire hyperspace journey. He'll just find another one. And honestly, the way this mission is going, cartoon physics might be our best chance. Dodonna stared at her. "Princess, with all respect, what are you talking about?" "Watch." Sylvester finished his modifications, climbed into the Y-Wing's cockpit, despite having no training, no understanding of rebel technology, and being a cat, and activated the engines. The bomber lifted off the hangar floor with surprising smoothness. The cat's paws worked, the controls with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, which in cartoon logic, he probably had. The net launcher rotated toward Tweety. The cat's face split into a grin of pure anticipation. He pressed the firing stud. The net launched with perfect accuracy. It spread wide, descended toward the bird with mathematical precision, and Tweety flew straight up through a gap in the netting that shouldn't have existed. The net missed completely, wrapped around the Y-wing itself, and pulled the bomber into a spectacular crash landing. The cat tumbled out, stars circling his head. His pilot's helmet somehow both cracked and perfectly intact simultaneously. Several rebel pilots had stopped to watch. One of them, Wedge Antilles, turned to his wingman. "Did that just happen?" "I think so. Should we be concerned that a cat can fly a Y-wing better than most of our pilots?" "Probably." Luke approached the crash site, his hand instinctively on his lightsaber despite the threat, being a disoriented feline. "Are you okay?" Sylvester gave a thumbs up, shook himself back to proper cat configuration, and immediately spotted a rebel flight suit hanging nearby. His eyes lit up with renewed inspiration. "Oh no," Leia said. "He's got an idea." She was right. Sylvester grabbed the flight suit, pulled it on over his fur, and marched toward the pilot lineup with absolute confidence. He even had a name tag now, Red Leader Cat. "Absolutely not," Dodonna said firmly. "Princess, I respect your judgment, but we cannot allow a cat to fly a combat mission against the Death Star." "Why not?" Obi-Wan asked mildly. He'd been watching the entire exchange with that infuriating serenity. He survived an encounter with Darth Vader. He can pilot rebel craft. And most importantly, he operates outside the Force's predictability. The Emperor's visions won't account for him. Because he's a cat, so is his survival rate higher than ours. Obi-Wan gestured to the assembled pilots. "Most of these brave souls won't return from this mission. We know this. They know this. But the cat? He's been blown up, crushed, spaced, incinerated, and worse. And yet here he stands, ready to try again." Dodonna opened his mouth, closed it, then turned to his tactical officers. "Is this really where we're at? Recruiting cartoon characters?" "Sir," one officer replied carefully. "Our analysis shows a 99.7% failure rate for this mission. At this point, cartoon characters might improve our odds." In the hangar, Sylvester had climbed into an X-Wing, Red 5. As it happened, the fighter assigned to Luke Skywalker. The cat tested the controls, made satisfied noises, and gave another thumbs up. Luke stared at his commandeered fighter. That's my ship." Tweety flew over and perched on Luke's shoulder. "Don't worry. The Putty Tat is a very good pilot. He's crashed lots of times." "That's not reassuring." "Luke," Leia said gently, "take Red 2. Let the cat have Red 5. But, trust me, if there's one thing I've learned about these two, it's that trying to stop them only makes things worse." Luke looked to Obi-Wan for guidance. The old Jedi nodded slightly. "The Force moves in ways we cannot predict. Perhaps this is one of those ways." And so it was decided. Through a combination of exhaustion, desperation, and the sheer impossibility of arguing with cartoon logic, that Sylvester the cat would fly as Red 5 in the attack on the Death Star. The briefing concluded. Pilots moved to their fighters. Han watched from the sidelines. His reward loaded, his ship fueled, every instinct telling him to run. Chewbacca rumbled a question. Yeah, I know, Han replied. I know we should help, but that's suicide out there. And I'm not dying for some princess's noble cause, no matter how cute she is. Chewbacca gave him a long, disappointed look. Don't look at me like that. I'm a smuggler, not a hero. In the hangar, Sylvester was making final pre-flight checks with surprising competence. Tweety had somehow gotten into the X-Wing's astromech socket, replacing R2-D2, who beeped indignantly from the hangar floor. Luke rushed over. Tweety, you can't. That's R2's position. But I want to help to putty-tat. Tweety protested. You want to help him, or you want to make him crash? Tweety's innocent smile widened. Maybe both. Luke pulled the bird out of the fighter and returned R2-D2 to his proper position. The droid beeped gratefully. But as Luke turned away, Tweety flew up and perched on the X-Wing's nose cone, right between the laser cannons. I'm coming too, the bird announced. That's not, you can't. Luke stopped. He'd learned by now that telling these two what they couldn't do was pointless. Fine. Just try not to get in the way. The pilots assembled in their cockpits. Dodonna's voice came through on all frequencies. All wings report in. Red Leader, standing by. Red 2, standing by. Red 3, standing by. Red 4, standing by. There was a pause. Then, from Red 5's cockpit, a series of meows that somehow conveyed Red 5, standing by with perfect military precision. Several pilots laughed nervously. This was insane. They were about to attack the Empire's ultimate weapon with a cat in their formation. Lock S-foils in attack position, Red Leader commanded. The X-Wing's wings split into their distinctive X shape. Engines roared, and the Rebel fleet launched toward the Death Star, toward certain doom, toward desperate hope, toward a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. And somewhere in that fleet, a cat piloted an X-Wing with a bird perched on his nose, both of them playing out their eternal game against a backdrop of galactic war. Above Yavin, the Death Star emerged from hyperspace, its massive form blotting out the stars. On the bridge, Grand Moff Tarkin watched the planet below with cold satisfaction. You may fire when ready. Commence primary ignition, the weapons officer replied. The super laser began its charging sequence. In 23 minutes, Yavin 4 and everyone on it would cease to exist. The Rebel fleet approached at attack speed. Red Leader's voice crackled. This is it, boys. Stay tight and watch for TIE fighters. As if summoned by the words. Imperial TIE fighters swarmed from the Death Star's hangar base, dozens of them, screaming through space with predatory intent. The battle had begun, and in the chaos of laser fire, explosions, and desperate maneuvers, Sylvester spotted something that made his predatory instincts ignite with fierce joy. Tweety had somehow gotten loose from the X-Wing's nose. The little bird was flying through the battlefield, dodging TIE fighter blasts with impossible agility, weaving through laser fire like it was a game. The cat's mission changed instantly. Forget the Death Star. Forget the rebellion. Forget galactic freedom. The bird was loose in a space battle, and by all the cartoon logic in the universe, Sylvester was going to catch him. Red 5 broke formation with a wild yowl, pursuing Tweety through the dogfight with single-minded obsession. Behind him, Luke's voice crackled in confusion. Red 5, what are you doing? Get back in formation. But Sylvester couldn't hear anything except the call of the chase. The eternal game had resumed, now with starfighters, space stations, and the fate of democracy as the backdrop. It was going to be a very interesting battle. The Death Star's trench was exactly as the Rebellion's analysis had predicted, a canyon of metal 200 meters deep, running along the station's equator like a scar. Red Leader dove into it, with Gold Squadron following. Their mission clear: reach the exhaust port, fire proton torpedoes, and hope the impossible became possible. But Red 5 wasn't with them. Sylvester's X-Wing screamed through space in wild pursuit of Tweety, who somehow flew through the vacuum without a flight suit, oxygen, or any regard for the laws of astrophysics. The bird looped through laser fire with cheerful abandon, occasionally pausing to wave at the cat before zooming away again. Red 5, return to formation. Red Leader's voice was sharp with command. We need every fighter for the trench run. Sylvester's response was a series of determined meows that translated roughly to Bird first, Rebellion second. Luke Skywalker, flying as Red 2, watched the chaos with growing horror. The mission was falling apart. Gold Leader's Y-Wing had just exploded, taking his whole squadron with him. TIE fighters swarmed like angry insects. And their one unexpected advantage, the cartoon cat who couldn't die, was chasing a bird. Instead of helping, "I've got to get him back in formation," Luke said, banking hard to pursue Red 5. Negative, Red 2. Wedge and Tilly's called from Red 3. "We've got our own problems. 2 TIE fighters on my tail." Luke hesitated, torn between duty and the insane reality of their situation. Then Obi-Wan's voice echoed through his mind, not on the comm, but in the Force itself. "Trust in the Force, Luke. Let go. Let go." Easy to say when you weren't watching a cat-dog fight. TIE fighters while chasing a bird through a battle station's defensive perimeter. Aboard the Death Star, Darth Vader climbed into his custom TIE advanced fighter. He'd felt the disturbance the moment the battle began. That flat, two-dimensional presence that defied the Force's natural flow. The cartoon creatures were here, in his Death Star's airspace, disrupting Imperial fighter formations with their impossible existence. "This will be a day long remembered," Vader said to himself as his fighter launched. "It has seen the end of Kenobi. It will soon see the end of the rebellion." But even as he said it, he wondered if it would also see something unprecedented, the collision of absolute Imperial control with absolute cartoon chaos. His TIE fighter screamed into the battle, flanked by 2 wingmen. Vader's piloting was sublime, each movement precise, each kill efficient. He was death given form, the dark side flowing through him, guiding his hands, predicting enemy movements before they happened. Then he saw Red 5. The X-Wing flew in patterns that made no aeronautical sense, loops that shouldn't be possible in space, barrel rolls that defied inertia, sudden stops and starts that violated every law of motion. And perched on its nose, somehow visible even through the chaos of battle, was a small yellow bird. Vader locked onto the fighter. His targeting computer achieved solid lock. His finger moved toward the trigger. Tweety looked directly at him. Through space, through distance, through the canopy of Vader's TIE fighter. The bird made eye contact with the Dark Lord of the Sith and winked. Vader fired. The laser blast tracked perfectly, intercepting Red 5's position with mathematical certainty. They should have vaporized the fighter. Instead, at the last possible instant, Sylvester's X-Wing performed a maneuver that the laws of physics wept to witness. It rotated 90 degrees on an axis that didn't exist, and the laser fire passed through the space where the fighter had been without hitting anything. "What?" Vader said flatly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of existential confusion. Tweety flew off the X-Wing's nose and fluttered toward Vader's TIE fighter. The bird somehow crossed the vacuum of space, approached the Dark Lord's canopy, and tapped on it with one tiny wing. "Hello, Mr. Vader." Tweety's voice came through on the comm channel, which shouldn't have been possible. "Does this scary man want to play?" Vader's wingmen opened fire. Laser blasts converged on the bird from 3 directions simultaneously. Tweety pulled an umbrella from nowhere, opened it, and the laser fire bounced off harmlessly. Where the umbrella came from, how it deflected energy weapons, and why it was decorated with cheerful yellow flowers were questions that had no answers in this or any galaxy. Sylvester, seeing his prey within reach, abandoned all pretense of military discipline. Red 5 accelerated directly toward Vader's fighter. The cat's face visible through the canopy, twisted into a mask of predatory determination. The 2 craft were on a collision course. Vader's tactical computer screamed warnings. His wingmen broke off, unwilling to die for their commander's apparent suicide run. But Vader held steady, reaching out with the Force, trying to understand these creatures that existed outside its flow. At the last instant, both fighters pulled up, Vader through skill, Sylvester through cartoon logic, and passed within meters of each other. As they did, Tweety transferred from one fighter to the other, now perched on Vader's TIE fighter, chirping happily. I taught a putty tat." Vader looked up through his canopy. The bird looked down. They regarded each other with mutual incomprehension. Then Sylvester's X-Wing inverted and came back for another pass. And Vader realized with a mixture of horror and fascination that he was now part of the chase. The bird was using his fighter as a perch, which meant the cat would pursue him with single-minded obsession until one of them was destroyed, and since the cat couldn't be destroyed, that meant, "This is Red Leader." A voice crackled through the chaos. "I'm starting my attack run. Cover me. The mission, the trench, the exhaust port." Vader remembered why he was here. He shook his TIE fighter violently, trying to dislodge the bird, then banked hard toward the Death Star's surface trench where the remaining Rebel fighters were beginning their desperate assault. Tweety held on, riding the TIE fighter like a carnival attraction. Luke saw Vader's fighter approaching the trench, saw Red Leader and Red 10 diving into the canyon with Wedge on their wing, saw the end of everything if they failed. "I'm going in," Luke announced, pushing his throttle forward. "Cover me, Wedge." "I'm right behind you, Red 2. They dove into the trench, the Death Star's surface turrets tracking them, laser fire filling the narrow space with death. Red Leader was already making his run, his targeting computer locked on the exhaust port 2 kilometers ahead. "Almost there," Red Leader muttered, his focus absolute. "Steady, steady." Behind him, Vader's TIE fighter entered the trench, his targeting computer locked onto Red Leader. His finger tightened on the trigger. One shot, and the Rebel commander would die. One shot, and the Empire would. Tweety flew off Vader's fighter and straight into his line of fire. "Impossible," Vader breathed. The bird hovered in space directly between his weapons and Red Leader, somehow blocking a shot that covered a firing arc of several degrees. Red Leader fired his proton torpedoes. They streaked toward the exhaust port, tracking perfectly, the mission seconds from completion, and missed. "Negative," Red Leader reported, his voice heavy with defeat. "It didn't go in, just impacted on the surface." Vader fired, not at the bird, but around it. Red Leader's X-Wing exploded. One down. The rebellion's best pilot, gone. Luke watched his commander die, felt the weight of it in his chest, knew that he was next, that Wedge was next, that they were all going to die in this trench. Then Red 5 appeared. Sylvester's X-Wing dove into the trench with reckless speed, still chasing Tweety, completely ignoring the tactical situation. The cat's fighter weaved and bobbed, following the bird's impossible flight path, and in doing so, accidentally positioned himself between Vader and Luke. Vader fired. The shot that should have killed Luke Skywalker hit Red 5 instead. The X-Wing exploded in a spectacular fireball. Debris scattered across the trench. For one moment, it seemed that cartoon logic had finally met its match, that the cat had died in service to a rebellion he barely understood. Then, from the wreckage, a small shape emerged, singed, smoking, his flight suit in tatters, but alive. Sylvester tumbled through space, flailing comically, before somehow grabbing onto Vader's TIE fighter and holding on with desperate claws. The cat pressed his face against Vader's canopy, eyes wide, for standing on end, and meowed what could only be interpreted as, "I'm still coming for that bird." Tweety, meanwhile, had flown ahead to the exhaust port. The tiny bird perched on the edge of the 2-meter-wide opening and waved at Luke. "Over here," Tweety called. "This is the spot." Luke's targeting computer was active, calculating the shot, but Obi-Wan's voice echoed again. "Use the Force, Luke." "Let go." Luke switched off the computer. He reached out with feelings he didn't fully understand, trusting in something beyond technology, beyond tactics, beyond himself. Behind him, Vader fired again. Red 10 exploded, Wedge barely escaping. "Wedge, pull up and get clear," Luke ordered. "I'm going to try it manually." Vader locked onto Luke's X-Wing. "The Force is strong with this one," he murmured, feeling something familiar in the pilot's presence, something that tugged at memories. Anakin Skywalker had buried beneath years of dark side corruption. Vader's finger moved to the trigger. The shot was perfect. Luke Skywalker would die, the rebellion would fail, and the Emperor's vision would be fulfilled. Sylvester chose that moment to climb around to the front of Vader's TIE fighter, blocking the view screen completely, scrabbling for purchase on the smooth surface while still, somehow holding a fishing net heat, produced from nowhere. "Remove yourself from my fighter," Vader commanded, trying to shake the cat loose while maintaining his target lock. Tweety flew from the exhaust port directly toward Sylvester. The bird's flight path took him across Vader's line of fire just as the Dark Lord managed to clear his view screen. Vader fired on instinct. The laser blast hit Tweety dead center. Time seemed to stop. Luke was lining up his shot, his hand on the proton torpedo trigger, the force guiding him toward the one-in-a-million chance. But everyone's attention, Vader's, Sylvester's, even the force itself, focused on the small yellow bird that had just been hit by a TIE fighter's laser cannon at point-blank range. Tweety fell, not exploded, not vaporized, just fell, tumbling through space, his tiny body spinning end over end. Sylvester's expression changed. The predatory glee vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like horror. The cat released his grip on Vader's fighter and dove after the bird, abandoning the chase, abandoning everything. Reaching out with desperate paws, he caught Tweety gently, cradled the small body against his chest, and in that moment, floating in the vacuum of space above the Death Star's surface, Sylvester the cat finally held his eternal prey, but not in triumph. In fear. Tweety, the cat's expression asked, though no sound carried in space. Are you? The bird's eyes fluttered open. He looked up at the cat with that same innocent smile. I'm okay, putty-tat. Just pretending. Relief flooded the cat's face. Then embarrassment. Then the realization that he'd just revealed, in front of Darth Vader and the entire Rebel fleet, that he actually cared about the bird he'd spent every waking moment trying to catch. That's touching, Vader said, and for just an instant, there was something in his mechanical voice that almost resembled humanity, but irrelevant. He lined up his shot on Luke again. The targeting computer achieved lock. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then, from nowhere, the Millennium Falcon screamed out of hyperspace directly into the Death Star's trench. Yahoo! Han Solo's voice exploded across the comm. You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home. Han's quad lasers tore into Vader's wingmen. One TIE fighter exploded immediately. The other spun out of control and crashed into Vader's ship, sending the Dark Lord tumbling away from the trench, spiraling into space. Luke fired his proton torpedoes. The Force guided them true. The impossible shot became possible. The torpedoes entered the exhaust port, streaking toward the reactor core 2 kilometers below the Death Star's surface. Direct hit. Wedge confirmed. Sylvester and Tweety, still floating in space, still locked in their unexpected embrace, looked at each other as warning klaxons began screaming from the Death Star's interior. Time to go, Tweety suggested. The cat nodded. They flew, somehow, inexplicably, defying vacuum and physics, back toward the Millennium Falcon, which had slowed enough for them to catch up. The Death Star's surface began to buckle. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull. The chain reaction had begun. Let's go, Han shouted. Everyone get clear. The Rebel fighters broke off, accelerating away from the dying battle station. Sylvester and Tweety tumbled through the Falcon's still open cargo hatch just as Han made the jump to light speed. Behind them, the Death Star exploded in a bloom of light that briefly outshone the system's sun. 1,000,000 souls extinguished. An empire's invincibility shattered. A rebellion's hope rekindled. And in the Falcon's cargo hold, a cat and a bird sat together in exhausted silence, temporarily having forgotten why they were supposed to be fighting. The medal ceremony was everything the rebellion needed. A moment of triumph, a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the Empire's greatest weapon could be destroyed by courage and sacrifice. Princess Leia placed medals around Luke's and Han's necks while the assembled soldiers cheered. Chewbacca roared his approval. C-3PO and R2-D2 watched proudly. And sitting in the front row, both somehow wearing tiny rebel uniforms complete with miniature medals of their own, were Tweety Bird and Sylvester the cat. The cat held the medal awkwardly, still processing the fact that he'd accidentally become a war hero. The bird chirped happily, basking in the applause. They sat side by side, not chasing, not fighting, just existing together in a moment of genuine peace. It wouldn't last. Sylvester would inevitably resume his pursuit, driven by instincts older than reason. Tweety would inevitably evade him, flying just beyond reach, the eternal prey that could never be caught. The game would continue because that's what games did. They persisted, regardless of context, regardless of stakes, regardless of galactic consequences. But for now, in this moment, cartoon logic and Star Wars mythology had merged into something unprecedented. The rebellion had won not through superior firepower or military genius, but through chaos, through the unexpected, through two creatures who refused to follow any rules, including the rule that said they should follow rules. Han Solo leaned over to Leia during the ceremony. "So are they staying with us?" Leia watched the cat and bird, seeing in them something the rebellion desperately needed. Proof that the Empire's control was an illusion, that order could be disrupted, that sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply refusing to make sense. "I think they are," she replied. "The Alliance could use some chaos." "Great," Han muttered. "Just what we needed. Cartoon characters in a galactic civil war." But even he couldn't deny the truth. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, against the Empire's ultimate weapon, against Darth Vader himself, they'd survived. And two cartoon characters who couldn't die, couldn't lose, and couldn't stop chasing each other had been part of that survival. In space, Darth Vader's damaged TIE fighter drifted toward an Imperial recovery ship. Inside his helmet, Vader meditated on what he'd witnessed. The creatures from outside the Force. The boy strong with the Force. The familiar presence he'd felt. Something about that pilot reminded him of. No, that past was dead. Anakin Skywalker was dead. But as Vader's ship was recovered and he returned to Imperial service, a small doubt lingered. The Force had shown him order, control, absolute power. But these cartoon creatures had shown him something else. That existence could transcend suffering. That purpose could be found in the chase itself rather than the capture. That sometimes the game mattered more than the victory. It was a dangerous thought for a Sith Lord to have. Across the galaxy, in the Rebel base on Yavin 4, the celebration continued. Luke felt the Force flowing through him stronger than ever, guided by Obi-Wan's spirit. Han counted his reward and tried to convince himself he was definitely leaving tomorrow. Leia planned the next moves in a war that was far from over. And in the cargo hold of the Millennium Falcon, Sylvester studied his metal, then looked at Tweety. The bird smiled back. The cat's eyes narrowed. His whiskers twitched. His tail began to swish with renewed predatory interest. Tweety noticed. "Oh." Sylvester lunged. The chase resumed, crashing through the cargo hold, bouncing off walls, defying physics, and proving once again that some things, like the eternal dance of predator and prey, like hope persisting against tyranny, like cartoon logic surviving even in galaxies far, far away, were truly universal constants. The rebellion had struck its first major victory. The Empire had been wounded. And somewhere in the chaos of it all, a cat chased a bird through a universe that would never quite be the same again. The Force worked in mysterious ways. But sometimes, just sometimes, it worked in absolutely absurd ways too. And that absurdity, that refusal to be controlled or predicted or understood, might be exactly what the galaxy needed to believe in freedom again. After all, hope shines brightest in the darkest night, even when that hope comes wearing feathers and chasing it comes wearing fur.